Welcome to episode 18 of Islam in the Contemporary World, a new narrative. Can Muslims break free from the chains of the past and lead once more in global thought and culture? Zafarullah Khan argues that the true promise of Islam lies not in restriction, but in an ocean of intellectual freedom. Let's explore what that means and why it matters now more than ever.
Right. Today, we are doing a deep dive into some key excerpts from Zafarullah Khan's book, Islam in the Contemporary World, A New Narrative.
And specifically that chapter, In Freedom, It is a Shoreless Ocean.
Exactly. It's a really evocative title, isn't it? It's actually from the poet Iqbal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Iqbal wrote, "The rivulet of life dries up in slavery, and in freedom it is a shoreless ocean." Khan uses this powerful image right at the start to frame, well, his entire argument.
That quote definitely sets a powerful tone because Khan, he starts off with a pretty tough assessment, doesn't he?
He really does.
He looks at the Muslim world today and basically says that Islam, which he describes as, the last mercy of the Lord for mankind, has somehow become, well, almost the opposite. A tool for negative things, exploitation, poverty, even violence in some contexts.
It's a very stark diagnosis. He's essentially saying something has gone fundamentally wrong.
And what does he pinpoint as the reason?
His core argument is that this distortion is happening because Muslims are, and this is his phrase, stuck to the past.
Stuck to the past.
Yeah. This kind of fixation, he thinks, stops them from creating a truly modern existence that's also genuinely Islamic.
So a huge gap between what Islam could be and what he sees currently.
A massive gap. He actually believes Islam could have been, maybe even should have been, a leader in modern global development.
Wow. So why wasn't it? Why was that opportunity missed, in his view?
He puts it down squarely to one main thing, a profound lack of real ijtihad.
Ijtihad. Okay, remind us. That's the concept of independent reasoning, right? Scholars engaging directly with sources to figure out new issues.
Precisely that. Independent thinking, research, applying principles to new contexts. Khan argues this failure, this lack of intellectual effort, is directly tied to many struggles faced today. Like the lack of peace in many places, the absence of widespread prosperity, the inability, really, for the collective potential of Muslims to be realized. He basically sees it as a kind of intellectual paralysis.
So if I'm following, Khan is saying the root problem is a kind of intellectual slavery, holding on to old ways instead of embracing Islam's inherent dynamism.
That's exactly his central thesis, intellectual servitude. He thinks this is the #1 barrier holding things back.
And he doesn't just see one form of this, right? He identifies two main ways this plays out, almost opposites.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. On one hand, you've got what he terms the religious class.
Okay.
He sees them as deeply tied to the distant past, just unable or perhaps unwilling to move forward intellectually. Right. Operating within what he calls a decadent and anachronistic intellectual paradigm. And because they've fallen into this particular kind of intellectual slavery, they've essentially given up on ijtihad, on academic research, on thinking independently.
And how do they view ideas coming from, say, the West?
Often with outright rejection, seeing it all as potentially kufri, heresy or disbelief. There's this view that Western thought is just materialist. It leads away from faith towards atheism or secularism.
So deep suspicion there.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is the historical parallel Khan draws.
Oh, right.
He compares this mindset in some parts of the contemporary religious class to how the Christian church reacted during the Renaissance, specifically to new scientific discovery.
This must be where the Galileo story fits in.
It is. Khan uses Galileo's struggle as a powerful example of this pattern, resisting intellectual progress.
Right.
He talks about Copernicus first,
Yeah.
proposing the heliocentric model, the Earth going around the sun.
Which clashed directly with the church-backed view of an Earth-centered universe, the Ptolemaic system.
Correct. And Copernicus's work, banned.
And then Galileo comes along with his telescope.
It gathers evidence supporting Copernicus.
And ends up facing the Inquisition.
Yeah. Despite being old, sick, he's dragged to trial, forced to publicly renounce his belief in the heliocentric view. Basically, forced to lie to fit the established doctrine.
And that's where we get that famous, maybe apocryphal line he supposedly muttered afterwards, "I pur si muove," and yet it moves.
It's such a powerful symbol, isn't it? Truth persisting despite attempts to crush it. Khan brings this up to show how the church initially saw these new rational ideas as repugnant to its long-professed dogmas.
And use its power to punish the thinkers.
But ultimately, that new way of thinking, based on reason, addressing the needs of the time, it won out.
Right. The church, clinging to what Khan calls absurd and irrational beliefs in this context, had to give ground intellectually.
And Khan's point in bringing all this up, he sees a somewhat similar dynamic playing out today in some Muslim circles. He argues some contemporary religious figures are echoing that historical resistance. And in doing so, they inadvertently make Islam, which he insists is fundamentally a progressive religion, seem backward or stagnant.
Does he give modern examples of this resistance?
He does. He mentions Dr. Fazal-ur-Rahman, a very respected Pakistani scholar studied at Oxford.
Okay.
His ideas, especially around modernizing family laws based on Islamic principles, caused a huge uproar. He ended up having to resign his post, left Pakistan, and couldn't really go back. He continued his work advocating for Islamic reform from the U.S., though.
And Muhammad Asad, the famous convert and writer.
Him, too. Khan notes Asad, who was actually close to Iqbal, also faced antipathy from religious people in Pakistan. He eventually left, largely because he was such a strong proponent of ijtihad, of rational engagement with the faith.
So these modern cases, echoing Galileo's struggles centuries earlier, they really highlight the difficulty Khan sees in overcoming this first type of intellectual slavery, the one rooted in resisting change and clinging to a static past.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's one extreme, stuck in the past, often rejecting the West. You said Khan identifies another kind of intellectual slavery.
Yes, the other side of the coin, you could say. He talks about the modern educated segment of Muslim society.
And their issue.
He describes them quite bluntly as a blind slave of Western civilization.
Okay, so the opposite problem.
Right. This group looks only to the West as the source of all knowledge, all progress, and ends up emulating it blindly.
And the consequence is they lose touch with their own heritage, their own values.
That's precisely Khan's argument. They adopt Western standards wholesale, not just for technology or science, but for morality, for values, for everything. They accept the West uncritically, just like the first group rejects it uncritically.
So both are essentially forms of dependence, just dependent on different things.
Yes. Neither is truly independent or critically engaged. Both, in Khan's view, stem from this lack of dynamic ijtihad.
Okay, the diagnosis seems pretty clear then. Muslims caught between slavery to a rigid past and blind imitation of the West. What's Khan's way out? What's the prescription for breaking these chains?
Well, he lays out a few key steps. First, he says, Muslims need to ditch the assumption that everything coming from the West is automatically bad or un-Islamic.
Get past the automatic rejection.
Exactly. Instead, apply a basic principle from Islamic jurisprudence. Adopt what is good and give up what is bad. It's about developing a critical filter based on Islamic principles.
So it's discernment, not just a blanket yes or no. Does he mention specific Western qualities that might be good to adopt?
He does. He points to things like diligence, honesty in dealings, the drive for knowledge and research, respect for human rights, the concept of a welfare state, democratic values, things like that.
And how does he justify bringing these in?
He actually cites a well-known hadith, a saying of the Prophet Muhammad. Wisdom is our lost object. We should pick it up no matter where we find it.
Ah, that's a powerful way to frame it. Like wisdom belongs to Muslims inherently, even if it's currently found elsewhere. It needs reclaiming.
Precisely. So that's step one, critical adoption. Step two, he insists, is the absolute need to eliminate intellectual slavery itself.
Okay, how?
By examining Western thought and civilization critically, not just worshipfully. Learn from it, yes. See it as a guide, perhaps, but don't make it the ultimate destination or the unquestioned model.
So, understand it deeply, warts and all, including potential negatives, like maybe hostility to religion or what he calls an animalistic side.
Right. See it clearly without being, completely dazzled or intimidated by its shiny surface. Khan really stresses the need to trust and rely upon our own values without being dazzled by the exterior of Western culture.
Don't just look at the surface.
Exactly. He says, dig deeper. Ask if modern civilization actually leads to real happiness, or if it often leaves people feeling, well, empty or frustrated.
So the path involves engaging critically with the outside and relying deeply on your own internal compass, your own values.
Yes. And then there's a third element, which is really his ultimate aim.
Which is?
For Muslims to become a major force again, maybe even to reclaim intellectual leadership on the global stage, actively shaping the future direction of thought and culture.
That sounds incredibly ambitious,
Yeah.
especially given his earlier description of the current situation, intellectual weakness, this servitude being behind. He even calls it a Herculean task.
It is a huge task, absolutely. But Khan finds hope in history.
How so?
He reminds us, look, at the dawn of Islam, the very first Muslims were, materially speaking, quite weak compared to the giants of their time, Rome, Persia, Greece.
Right.
Yet somehow they managed to snatch world leadership from those established empires.
Yeah, so his argument is it happened once against perhaps even greater odds, so it's not impossible for it to happen again.
Exactly. And he points to the Quran itself, specifically verse 3.140, which talks about the cycles of fortune among nations. It says, "Such days of varying fortunes we give to men and men by turns."
Meaning power shifts. What's down can come up and what's up can go down. Leadership isn't permanent.
Right. It suggests the current state, whatever challenges exist, isn't some fixed destiny. Change is possible. History shows it. The Quran confirms it.
So how does Khan believe Muslims can actually achieve this monumental shift, this resurgence he envisions? What drives the change?
He says it demands immense dedication, even sacrifice, for what he calls the cause of knowledge and betterment.
And who leads this?
He puts a particular responsibility on religious scholars and intellectuals. Their job, as he sees it, is to actively campaign against intellectual slavery in all its forms.
And to inspire people.
Yes, especially the younger generations. Inspire them to pursue real human development, focusing on, substance, not just superficial distractions or trends.
So it's not about chasing the latest fads or seeking external approval. It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. He uses this crucial term, kuti. It's often translated as selfhood or maybe ego, but in a positive spiritual sense, your inner core.
Okay.
And he urges Muslims, don't sell ourselves. Don't lose that core identity, that inner strength. Instead, he says, we have to delve deep into ourselves to gain moral and spiritual strength.
So the strength comes from within first.
For it is the moral force, he concludes, that ultimately wins and conquers the world.
Wow. So the journey back to leadership, to unlocking that shoreless ocean of potential Khan talks about, it isn't primarily about external power or politics, is it?
Not fundamentally, no.
According to Khan, it really starts inside. Cultivating that inner moral and spiritual strength, the kuti, then combining that with rigorous independent critical thinking the ED had.
Exactly.
And then having the confidence to seek wisdom wherever it's found, but always filtering it through your own informed judgment, your own values.
I think that really captures the essence of Khan's message, yes. True freedom, true potential, emerges when you shed those intellectual chains, whether they tie you to a frozen past or make you blindly follow others, and instead build strength from your own conscience, your own core, your own reasoned faith.
So let's recap briefly. We've explored how Zafarullah Khan sees intellectual slavery and clinging too tightly to the past as major obstacles for the Muslim world. He draws these really compelling parallels, like with Galileo, showing historical struggles against, well, intellectual stagnation.
Right. And his call isn't just for small reforms, it's for a genuine resurgence, for Muslims to step up and reclaim intellectual leadership, but by embracing freedom and critical thinking, crucially, filtered through sound Islamic principles.
Which means practically letting go of those intellectual dependencies we talked about. Engaging critically, discerningly, with outside ideas, taking the good, leaving the bad, based on principle.
Yes, and seeking wisdom actively wherever you might find it, like that hadith says, but ultimately trusting and developing your own values, your own intellectual power.
And Khan genuinely believes this path, though yes, incredibly difficult, can actually lead to a new era. A time where Muslims could lead again, much like those historical shifts mentioned in the Quran, where the fortunes can turn and the vanquished can become victors.
It's a hopeful yet challenging vision. It puts the onus back on internal development. Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener.
If, as Khan powerfully suggests, real strength truly comes from within, from really delving into your moral and spiritual self, your kuti, what personal intellectual slavery or maybe past might you need to break free from?
To unlock your own shoreless ocean of potential,